Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see on our screen, we've got Kim, myself, and Kim again. There's a definite technology situation happening here. We've got laptops and phones, etc. But I suppose that's the way that it is. So we've got Kim is going to be talking about conflict coverage when it comes to photojournalism, etc. And to sort of start it all off, Kim is wanting to show off a clip of what it's like in the zone. So I'm going to try and set this up here, my screen, his screen, etc. So give us 2 seconds. Here we go. This is crazy. So I suppose theoretically kind of felt a little crazy here now with all of this technology.
Well, we're talking about covering war, which is crazy.
This feels a little like a bit of a skirmish here myself. So I think just to say again, thank you very much for coming through. I know I'm looking forward to this presentation and seeing that. And there was quite a startling, entrance. So I think if you want to share your screen and let's see your images.
Yeah, Quentin, thanks for the second time for having me, and to everyone who's out there listening, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you got in your walk and your run or whatever you managed to do this morning as we move to level 4 lockdown. But, I just wanted to, sort of intro the talk with that bit of video, because, that is actually the reality of civil war. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do for a news agency in terms of covering conflict. And that junction that you saw was exactly where I worked for about a week in 2011, covering the civil war in Libya. So, it's just a good example that it's just a crazy space to work in, and a crazy environment to be a photographer.
I'm just going to say
thanks for having me.
The start of this presentation felt to me as chaotic as it did on that intersection there. I mean, that was crazy. Everything's going on there.
Yeah, so I mean, that I'll elaborate a bit about sort of what it's like to cover conflicts and the types of conflict I've covered and what equipment I use. But then I want to elaborate on the main sort of point of this talk, and what I'd like to introduce people to is the fact that conflict isn't only bang bang. It's not only a civil war or a invasion of Iraq or whatever. Conflict can be anything. It can be conflict about nature and environment. It can be conflict about land. It can be conflict within the house even. So, for me, conflict photography is quite a broad sphere of working in. I think I'll just start off by sort of introducing where I've worked. And then I'm going to talk about sort of the 3 main conflicts that I covered, and actually how different they were to cover, which could be quite interesting. I think like last time, I suppose you haven't asked everyone, Quentin, but if anyone wants to ask questions, go ahead at any time in the talk. So yeah, I mean, as a a news agency photographer, it's one of the three main things that I do. When I say three main things, I shoot a lot of sport, and I shoot a lot of what I call features, which is documentary work. And then, of course, the whole basis of a news agency like I work for, EPA Photos, is to cover news. And part of news is covering conflict. And what's interesting is, we never forced as staff photographers to cover conflict. It's not like you have to go and cover something. It's like a quick pro quo. You volunteer to go. So I'll also talk a little bit about that later. But in brief, I've in the last sort of 17 years, I've covered the second invasion of Iraq, which is where this picture was from. I've covered the civil war in Liberia. That was in 2003 when Charles Taylor was ousted from power. This is one of the pictures from that junction that we just saw in Libya. And I must say that, just as a bit of a warning, I have included one or two graphic pictures. I included them with sensitivity, but I'm warning you that they will be quite graphic, just because I think that it is about me showing some of the stuff that I've covered, but not from my perspective, but the importance of what we do as a news agency and other photojournalists and news cameramen to show you, the public, what's happening. So just a little warning, there are one or two graphic pictures.
Let's hope that Facebook doesn't terminate our...
Oh, okay. I didn't think of that.
So maybe just it might be something to consider.
Okay, no, absolutely. I'll go straight past it. Like, you'll see like 1 second.
Okay, cool.
You won't even see anything. Okay, cool. Understood. So, I've worked a lot in Africa, where unfortunately most sort of elections, a lot of elections, should I say, do end up with some form of violent resolution. And this picture was shot in Zanzibar in 2007, I think. So again, this is a picture from Kenya, elections in 2008. So that's sort of, one thing that you can almost expect when you cover elections in some parts of Africa, is that there will be some form of violence surrounding the beginning of it, or especially after the results, when people are unhappy. Another picture from Kenya. In South Africa, I've covered sort of literally countless. I can't remember how many what we call service delivery protests. It's quite a strange sort of almost apartheid era sounding sort of terminology about anything that's a protest is now a service delivery protest. So that's something that I cover a lot of, particularly in Joburg. This picture's from Fees Must Fall, which was actually one of the hardest sort of conflict or hard news things that I've covered. There was a lot of violence, but I found it really tough to cover right on my doorstep here. I mean, I live in Western and I can almost see Wits from where I'm sitting. So yeah, it was quite difficult to cover in some ways. Lots of sort of police arrests and police related topics in South Africa. I'll just go past that one. So, yeah, it's gone. Right. So that's just a bit of a sort of introduction to what I've covered, and what I wanted to look at now is three specific conflicts, and from my perspective as a photographer, how vastly different all three were. So this picture, as you can already see, is about child soldiers. This was, the conflict in Liberia, and in my case, when I went to cover that as a journalist, I want to talk a little bit about how we cover these stories. I mean, that was really a very volatile, out of control story to cover. And, I must say, before I carry on, is that most journalists from news agencies, we're blessed to go on hostile environments courses, which are courses that our agencies send us on so that we can gain knowledge on how to protect ourselves, what to do if we kidnapped, what not to do if we kidnapped. I think that's more important. How to handle ourselves in the field, first aid, if we injured or if colleagues of ours are injured. So, you do go to these environments with a certain amount of knowledge, and but then on the other hand, you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that's the balance that you try and find. So in Liberia, it was really mad, because you had these sort of factions of youth, like really young kids, man, like that picture I just showed. I mean, they must be like mid-teens, and a lot of them were on drugs, and they've all got Kalashnikovs. So, you know, covering a story like that, I'll just go past that. Covering a story like that is very difficult, because it's really out of control. You don't know what is going to happen at any given checkpoint, or how a soldier is going to react to you. So, you know, I found it very stressful and quite difficult to work this type of story. You know, if you know me, or by the end of this talk, you'll know that I'm very open about my work and my life and so on. So I have no qualms in telling you that on my 2 visits to this conflict, I saw absolutely no gunfights, and it was more about actually the humanitarian side of conflict. And that's one thing I'm going to talk a bit about through this talk. It's not only about literally the fighting. Wherever you have a civil war or a conflict, there's going to be massive repercussions for the public. So that's a large part of what we do as photojournalists, is to, you know, to cover like this picture here. You know, this is what we do when we go to a conflict. It's really important that I go to the hospital where this young girl was shot in the shoulder, and, you know, get permission from the doctors to photograph her operation. So, you know, conflict photography is very often about the aftermath and the effects of conflict, you know, not only the conflict itself. So Liberia, for me, I did 2 trips there, and very much most of my work, and I actually edited it just before this talk. I remember now, it was mostly about the humanitarian side of things, going to hospitals, going to cover funerals of people who've died. In this case, we often work with aid agencies because, you know, it helps us get access, let's be honest. But secondly, you know, they want us there. You know, it's like a bit of a one hand washes the other scenario. And then a picture like this, which is frankly not a great picture, but it's an important story. You know, these were women who were raped by some of those combatants, by the soldiers. So this is a conflict picture. It's an important one, you know, because also we're there to document what happens for generations and for history. So, you know, that's a little glimpse at Liberia. So for me, it was more about the humanitarian effects of the conflict. And, you know, it was just literally by chance, the 2 trips I made, there was no fighting while I was there. And frankly, I was actually pretty stoked about that. In that case, you know, I just stayed in a hotel and basically got a driver and drove into the streets to go and find the story. This is now some pictures I'm going to talk about, was 2004, which was the second invasion of Iraq. So in this case, I had a completely different experience. Again, I saw zero combat there. And the only way that we could cover the story as an agency was to embed ourselves with the US military. So in this case, I spent basically a month there, embedded with US infantry. So this was a case where, you know, your US government would allow you access to the story. Having said that, we had to sign like a 5-page contract about what we were allowed to do and not allowed to do, and what we were allowed to cover and not allowed to cover. And so, you know, sort of years down the line, I look back on it and I realized that it was very single view of that conflict. You know, you only saw what the American army allowed you to see, basically. So, you know, you'll see from my pictures, most of the time I spent going on patrol with them. At that stage, it was about that period when Saddam Hussein was caught. There was no conflict. So, you know, I spent most of my life, you know, going on patrol. So all of my pictures from that conflict was more about the American soldiers, you know. We got pretty close to them, but again, they wouldn't allow you to photograph really discreet personal moments that much. But, you know, I joined them when they were playing American football, for instance, in this picture. We were allowed to photograph them on parade. And just interestingly, where we lived was in Tikrit, they had basically turned one of Saddam Hussein's palaces into their army base. So it was quite a cool backstory that I basically slept in Saddam's palace for a month. There was 8 other journalists with me, and in this case, you live off military ration packs, and you basically live with American troops. You don't get any access to the Iraqi side of the story. It's not like you can leave the base and go and talk to Iraqis. So it was a pretty sort of one-sided view of that conflict when I look back on it. But unfortunately, in some conflicts, that's the only way Western journalists, well, I shouldn't say Western, but journalists per se, can actually get access to a story. So yeah, you can see from my pictures that it was pretty much mostly going on patrol and documenting US soldiers' lives, including like some sort of weird ceremony where, they had to stand at attention and get covered in shaving cream. Don't know why. I think it was Christmas Day, actually. Can't remember. So the next set of pictures I'm going to talk about refer to the video that we saw. And all of these pictures were shot in and around that junction in Libya. So in this case, I went to cover the civil war in Libya. This was 2011. This was part of that Arab Spring where, I don't know if you remember, but most of North Africa into Egypt, it started in Tunisia. Basically, civilians rose up against their leaders, in this case, Gaddafi, who had been a dictator for decades. And this was a completely different way to cover a story as well, because the rebels actually allowed us and wanted us as journalists to cover the conflict. So in this case, we would have been arrested or maybe even shot if we tried to cover the conflict from the side of the Libyan army. So the only way we could see and cover this conflict was with the rebels. And it was so bizarre. Like the first day I arrived there, they even had their own little office, and they had like a press card that they gave us. So it was quite a well-organized, should we say, way that they wanted Western media to cover the story. And what was also interesting was they only allowed us to cover it until they started to get defeated. And then, boop, roadblocks were put up and they didn't allow us to cover the story. But as you saw from the video, I mean, this was full-on conflict. We were basically shelled and bombed every day from government positions. And this picture is like for me, quite a strong conflict image, because this is some rebels, and myself included, obviously, sort of hiding in a ditch next to the road because another sort of volley of government shells are coming into our position. So this was a very different story to cover, and a different way of covering it to the other two that I've just mentioned. Technically, yeah. Just
a question here from Anton Bester. Sorry to interject there.
No, go.
The question is, I suppose your gut feel plays an important role when engaging during conflict situations, when to back off and not point the camera.
Yeah, Anton, yeah, good question. I mean, doesn't matter what training you have and at these hostile environments, things, or what experience you've got. I mean, it's such a volatile scenario that, anything can happen. So the one challenge is to listen to the sixth sense, and that's where your ego comes into play, because, let me be honest at this point. Obviously, I wanted to cover these, otherwise I wouldn't have been there. I mean, there's a part of me that used to want to cover conflict. So, and I'll elaborate a little bit later how I still cover conflict, but it's in a very different way. But it's always that sort of little balance that you have between, okay, I need to get the picture, I want to, or do I miss the picture but save myself, or do I listen to that inner voice, or do I tell the inner voice to keep quiet? Because the reality is that sometimes in these scenarios, you have to tell the inner voice to keep quiet. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't go out there every day. And in this case, just to elaborate how it actually worked was, I lived in a hotel. There was like some shitty hotel about a half an hour's drive from the front line, in rebel-held territory, where there were probably, again, there was 5 or 6 other photographers and cameramen, and we would go to the front line each day, and we would have drivers. So we always hire someone who can drive for us and communicate. I don't speak Arabic, so there would be no. I would find it almost impossible to work there without someone who's local. And then we would work the day and then come home in the evening, just because basically nighttime is way too dangerous to work. So thanks for the question, Anton. Yeah, it's basically this fine line that you got to keep drawing between your ego and your sixth sense, basically. So yeah, this was getting shelled and bombed each day, and what I actually did. So here's a nice example of that junction. I made sure that I had 4 or 5 places to hide when the next shells started to come in. So that's one thing you do all the time when you're in these environments, is you're constantly checking where you can be safe, where it's dangerous, how you get yourself out. And it's just called situational awareness. You must always know where you are and what's happening, who's around you, like journalist wise as well. And you'll find that it's quite a small band of brothers, if you want to use that phrase, of journalists who work these stories, because you do realize that at some stage you may need your colleagues to help you. So you need to know at all times where you can be safe, and where's not safe. So yeah, it's all a different parameter for different people. I presume most people would never go to a place like this, and I don't blame them. Yet there is a bizarre sense of safety within even that madness, if you just have those parameters for yourself, and listen to the sixth sense. So yeah, again, here's sort of not too bad a picture. It's obviously at a morgue of someone who's died in the conflict. So when you're covering these stories, you're constantly looking on ways that you can cover it that would show the humanitarian side. And the older I've got, the more I've wanted to not do bang bang like this picture, which is a guy stupidly trying to shoot a plane down with a machine gun, which is not going to work. And I'm trying to find ways to show conflict in a much more subtle way. Also, I like to shoot sort of images like this, which is like the spoils of war. This is what war's about. It's about metal. It's about, guns, machinery. And just as that sort of clip that we introed alluded to, I mean, conflict's a horrific space to be in. It really, it's loud, it's noisy, and the smell as well. It's a really brutal space to be in. Not only talking about myself, of course, but combatants and unfortunate civilians who are caught up in these scenarios. Here for me is quite a powerful picture, because here's a rebel on the front line, and you can just see that he's got shell shock, like in his eyes. He's completely broken. He's probably been fighting for days or weeks. I mean, I didn't speak to him. You sort of gesture, "Hi, how are you?" Yeah, and there was just nothing that came back from him. So I just got a bit closer to him with a 50mm lens and shot this portrait. So, for me, especially the older I get, as I keep saying, is this for me is a powerful conflict image, just because you can see in his eyes. So, this is also important. This is also an important conflict picture. It's a Muslim country. All the combatants from both sides are Muslim. 5 times a day they stop and pray. Doesn't matter if there's in the middle of the conflict. So another strong picture, like the spoils of war. There's like a thing of dates there for lunch, and this guy's exhausted, completely broken. So subtlety is also important. I think that's what I'm trying to say, as opposed to only sort of the hard news image and stuff like this. So I'm sort of now moved away from talking about those three sort of main conflicts and how different they were, to talking about this type of image, and this is from Liberia. So for me, this is mega important. You know, the shame, this young boy had malnutrition and he was in a refugee camp there. So, and there was his mom trying to take care of him. And so this is, for me, a very important, strong conflict image, even though it's not about guns and shooting. Very similar image from Kenya in 2008. This is like one of these massive refugee camps that were the result of the conflict there, you know, between the political parties. So, you know, again, a really important part of what we do as journalists is to show this. And I personally like to really bring the human side to my stories more and more. And in this coronavirus that I've been covering, I've been doing it a lot. Because I think you tell a story really well if the viewer can connect with a specific person and understand their story, which is part of, you know, a microcosm and part of the much bigger story itself. Yeah, so September last year we had another sort of outbreak of xenophobia, and so this is the more subtle images that I try to shoot now. And this was, you know, a Zimbabwean man that died in the xenophobia violence, and I was at what's sort of one of the refugee camps, if you want to call it that, in Joburg South near Alberton, and I heard that his body was coming back to the refugee camp, and that they were going to have a service for him before his body was taken to Zimbabwe. So, you know, this is a conflict image. It's a result of conflict. And yeah. So this is, I've been to Congo 3 times, and this is sort of Eastern Congo, Goma area. One of those sort of permanent now refugee camps that are in the Goma area. And yeah, another really important conflict image, which is, you know, family and friends sort of praying on a Sunday in the refugee camp.
Kim,
yes, sir.
Just a question
minutes.
that I was going to ask, and John Lincourt has just asked it as well. Because you mentioned 50 mil earlier, what do you take with you when you're in those situations? As far as
thanks for the question. I think my work and my equipment's changed like quite radically actually. When I look at my older work, and I'll be quite outspoken about it, I had the terrible combination of 16-35 zoom and a 70-200. So, you know, the problem there is that the 16-35 is a lazy lens. People tend to use the zoom facility of the lens and not their feet. So what I mean by that is, like, I look at my old stuff and it's all at 16 mils. There's too much information in the picture. Heads are distorted. And, you know, it was probably maybe 5-6 years ago, I didn't physically throw it away, but I stopped using it. And so now I use, to date, I use a 28 mil and a 35 prime lenses, which really make your work cleaner. It's more clinical when you use them. You clean your images up. Like, for instance, this picture, and I'll elaborate on it just now. It was from the tsunami in Sri Lanka. But it's one of the worst things that happened to photojournalism is the advent of the 16-35 wide zoom. Really, if I'm, you know, teaching younger kids photojournalism, I tell them to put that away and get themselves a prime lens. So yeah, 2 prime lenses, but then of course I do have a 70-200. I use Canon, so the f4. That's in a case where, you know, that balance of safety is totally forcing you to step back from the scenario and shoot with a long zoom. So that's the answer. A 35 and a 28 on 2 5Ds, and then a 70-200, which is in like a pouch, which I actually used last week, which I'm going to show you some pictures of a red ants evicting people. So I had to pull it out then. It was just too wild. Too many stones and too many shotgun rounds going off. So you know, in that case, it's like, okay, put the ego aside, put the long zoom on and stand back a bit. So yeah, this picture is really a super interesting image because it's a conflict, and it's actually conflict of nature, because this was a graveyard that I came upon when I was covering the aftermath of the tsunami in Sri Lanka. And the wave, the two waves had come and basically, and you can see behind the skull, there's sort of the remnants of a graveyard. It had basically unearthed everyone that was dead and buried, and then taken people that were alive out to sea and buried them to sea. So someone had obviously tried to just demarcate this graveyard by putting the skull on the stick. So, you know, just, I'm going a little bit deeper into, you know, for me, what conflict photography is about. And you know, here's another example. So this is, I did a photo essay on a dog training school where the dogs are trained to fight poachers, who are obviously poaching rhino. So again, you know, here's conflict. It's conflict of humans and animals. And what I found fascinating there was that, you know, humans were training animals, in the case these dogs, to go and find humans that were killing animals. So, you know, more and more, I understand that conflict photography is not about the Liberia and the Libya and those big conflicts that I've done. It's more subtle. It is about the conflict over land, about nature. And in this case, I mean, this is just a picture of an environmental group called Extinction Rebellion. I shoot quite a lot of their stuff. And you know, this is a conflict picture. It's about them going to the JSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, to fight for, in their view, the rights of Earth. So this is conflict. And then I just threw this one in for fun. I mean, this is conflict of a different type. So I did a really amazing story. I found it incredible. Once a year, the Venda tribe have this sort of bare knuckle boxing tournament. And I went up there and covered it. It was fascinating. So, you know, here's conflict. Here's a bare knuckle, you know, boxing match between two men, or in the course of the day, there was sort of 10 or 15 fights. But, you know, and then I would even suggest that isn't a rugby test match a conflict? You know, just saying, I mean, it's a conflict between, you know, 30 players.
Yeah, two opposing forces.
Yeah. So, you know, here's pictures I shot last week, here's your classic picture. This is in Lawley in near Lenasia, illegal occupants on land. You know, the Joburg City Council get the Red Ants and the Metro cops to come and dismantle shacks. So, you know, there's a shootout. People have been being evicted, throw stones, and, you know, the Red Ants, you know, fire shotguns. So there's your sort of classic, you know, sort of conflict picture. And so I'll show you a couple more conflict pictures, but then I'll interestingly show you the picture that was used in the UK by the Guardian newspaper, which is this one here. So, you know, there's a lot of subtlety in this, but it's a conflict. It's a conflict because, you know, this man is holding his child, and there's the shack that he's built. The Red Ant is, you know, being told to come and break his shack down. So, you know, this is a conflict picture. It's a conflict over land, and it's an ongoing struggle around the world. The conflict for land, for the ability to build houses on it, for you know, conflict over destroying a rainforest so that you can have cattle farms on it. So this is a constant battle that continues. And then, you know, a couple of images now from my coronavirus coverage. And I would also just extend this argument to the fact that we're in a conflict at the moment. I mean, all of us, we're in this conflict with a thing that's unseen. I mean, it's so bizarre. You know, I've covered the story from day one, and I still haven't seen the virus. It's so bizarre for me as a photographer, because, you know, in those previous stories I showed you from Liberia and Libya and Iraq and so on, I mean, you can see the danger. You know, if you go there, you're in danger. If you don't, it's, you know, this is a safe spot to be. Where in this case, you know, with the virus, it is the most strange story to cover. So, you know, there's so much anxiety about it, quite rightly, of course. And for me, you know, I'm very anxious about my health out there, but you never see the enemy. So it's really, you know, it's quite strange. And again, sort of conflict. Here's a picture from one of the refugee camps, or should I say homeless shelters rather, in Pretoria. So this for me is a strong conflict picture. It's a man praying to God. It's a Sunday. He needs relief from the pain he's suffering of being in this homeless shelter and from the virus. Just a couple more pictures from the corona coverage. You know, this is one aspect of the story I've really wanted to spend a lot of time on, is just showing the plight of homeless people during the coronavirus. So yeah, that's and this conflict that we're in with this virus is going to continue for months. Again, another picture from Pretoria, from one of the homeless shelters. Yeah, this was a fascinating guy. He's been living in his car. I don't know when, there you go. He's been living in his car in Pretoria sort of just prior to the virus, homeless man called Vanna. And yeah, so I keep quite regularly going back to visit him and seeing how he's doing and documenting his life, you know. Another homeless guy that I met here in Johannesburg. So yeah, that's sort of, you know, enough of the sort of pictures. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how we work and maybe open the talk up to some more questions.
Cool. No, that sounds good.
I went through that a bit fast, I think, now that I realize.
It's not a problem at all. I was actually going to say when you're embedded with you know, with the US Army, what do you wear? Do you wear your media blues, or do you you know, wear, you know, the camo? Because obviously, you know, you stick out like a sore thumb, but I suppose that's both a good and a bad thing.
Yeah, so I mean, it's so funny you asked that, because here's a picture of me with two guys wearing funny hats. So yeah, this is the with 101st Infantry with the US. So yeah, look, it's you know, they don't stipulate to us what we must wear, but I mean, it's Iraq, and as you can see, we're all wearing sort of tan, sort of desert environment stuff. One of the big challenges we have, for instance, is that in this conflict in Iraq, it was absolutely fine for me to wear a bulletproof vest. No one wants to steal it from me or kill me for the vest, okay? But there were times in Libya where I was really concerned that one of those totally whacked out rebels was going to want my vest and either steal it from me or, you know, even worse, harm me to get it. So just in terms of what you wear and how you work, you know, you've really got to be really wide awake to the sort of nuances of what equipment you have and how you work the story. For instance, you know, if I go into Alex Township, for instance, in Joburg, you know, I'll go with one camera body, some cash in my pocket, and my cell phone. That's it. You know, I won't take in my whole system because, you know, for obvious reasons, there's a pretty good chance that you know, you may be liberated of your equipment there. Whereas with the US troops, you know, I just wore what I want. I took as much gear as I wanted. So it really does depend on the sort of scenario.
Okay, and then I've got another question. So, I mean, obviously, as a photographer, you're looking at composition and leading lines and all those things, yeah, but probably, you know, by second nature, because it's just something that you do. But the question that I have, because you know, in some of the pictures that I was seeing, you know, your height of your camera is sort of, you know, normal viewpoint height. So I suppose the question there is, how much are you thinking about composition and you know, especially the height that you take the pictures of when you're under pressure like it? I mean, like I said, I know a lot of the things are second nature, but it's just a question that I thought might be quite interesting.
Totally. No, I understand. No, I mean, let's cut to the chase. You're trying to to do your composition as best as possible. But when it's really breaking news, when you're in that scenario, it is one, second nature, and then two, you're almost there to just try and record the moment. You can't stop the conflict from happening, so that you can recompose and sort of get your lighting correct and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you a little secret, which a lot of people laugh about, really, and I mean it's a classic. So I used to use AV mode, so aperture priority most of my career. And then I was in a car with the legendary Joao Silva doing some protests, and in his inimitable way, dead straight, he looked at my camera and said, like, what the fuck are you doing on like AV mode? Why are you not on P for professional or program? I said, what are you talking about? I mean, no one uses program mode. And then he said, no, but you must, because, for instance, you could be driving down a road and turn a corner and something is happening in front of you, and you have, by the worst case scenario, the wrong settings, whatever it may be. And program mode ensures that you're going to get the image. The camera is going to work it out for you, shutter speed, aperture. And I'm not saying I use this all the time, but if it's really breaking news, then I often go on to program mode because of that. But secondly, you can also override program mode very quickly. In my case, I've set my camera, my 5D up to on the input dial, on the front of the camera. I can then change, if I want to shoot at 2.8, I just quickly dial it down to 2.8. So it's quite a nice way to work, is to be in program mode for that split second things. And really, it happens fast. I can't explain to you, sort of just showing these images, how fast things happen. And so, the worst case scenario is that you may, at times I'll use manual mode if I need to. If I need to pitch the light, in a certain way, I'll use manual. But in general, for that really hard news stuff where it's really the shit's happening in front of you, excuse the language, it's program mode, get the picture, and then you can override it, as I just explained. So what I find now, though, is that I'll try not to, if there's a news scenario in front of me, I'll try not to just by default go and shoot the obvious picture, which is the sort of bang bang picture. I'm starting to shoot more and more around the scene to try and find maybe an image which is more subtle, that's going to still tell the story. So in that case, then I'm using AV, then I'm using shutter priority 2.8, or even faster if I'm on, depending on what lens I'm on. So hope that helps with your question.
Absolutely. All right, let's see what we've got here. So John Lincourt is asking, what is your workflow when you come in from a day, being embedded?
Yeah, so thanks. So the one thing to remember is that quite often, let's take that embedded scenario. We're in Iraq. I mean, there is no cell phone network. It's a conflict zone. So the one critical thing that we all have to have as photojournalists is a sat phone. So we take along a BGAN satellite phone, which, it's incredibly expensive to use. So our company, EPA, is like super tight on us in terms of how often we can use it. But so my workflow would be that I shoot basically RAW and JPEG images, and I record them to separate cards. So I shoot the RAW onto a CF card and the JPEG onto a SD. But 90% of the time, if I'm not in a mega rush, I'm basically using the RAW images, and then I obviously ingest them to my laptop. And our company and most photojournalists use Photomechanic to edit. It was made by Camera Bits in the US specifically for Associated Press, and so its whole sort of way of working and mechanism is for our workflow, which is really a lot of images as fast as possible. And then I use Photoshop, obviously, to convert the RAW into JPEG and caption the images. And then they transmitted to Frankfurt, which is where our head office is, with a sat phone in that case, when I was in Iraq. At home, I'm doing the same thing. I mean, I'm shooting RAW and JPEG, and obviously from home, just using Wi-Fi. So yeah, that's my workflow. 2 5Ds and shooting on RAW. Very important.
Cool. All right. And then Laird Forbes says that he
Hey,
shoots
Laird, how's it?
exclusively on aperture priority,
Okay.
which stands for absolute professional. You know, you've got P for professional, but absolute professional.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
And then Anne Lang is saying, hi, Kim. Always say history repeats itself. Do you find the protests we covered in the late 80s and early 90s are much the same as the service delivery protests from the past few years? To me, the difference in terms of what one sees is that there are now many more black policemen, otherwise mostly the same.
Yeah, Laird, how's it, dude? Nice to hear from you. And yeah, I suppose, look, I mean, at the end of the day, we all know photography. It doesn't matter what camera you use, lenses, you know, just as long as the outcome is what you want. So, you know, whatever camera mode you use doesn't really matter. Laird, I would tell you to try and use Program Now and Then. Just check it out. It works quite nicely. To Anne, how the Scotties. So yeah, it's like copy paste. I mean, it's so bizarre how it really feels and looks the same. As you say, different types of policemen, different skin color, but almost exactly the same systems of policing, which, you know, just off the record drives me mad. I mean, I don't think we need to just like try and control people by using shotguns immediately. There's other ways to control people. It's called water cannons. There's, you know, there's other systems. So it's almost like, yeah, we're still in the apartheid era style of crowd control. And, you know, I've done some protests overseas in Europe and stuff, which I didn't include, but yeah, it's quite fascinating how we've got quite a brutal approach to, not only in South Africa, but in most African countries, to control people. So yeah, things are fairly similar. I suppose I could just change the caption and the date on some of my pictures and no one would know.
Absolutely. All right. I don't know if there's any other questions that are coming through. Laird says, thanks very much for the feedback. Extremely useful.
Let me just put the Instagram thing.
Yeah, put up the Instagram thing. I'm not sharing your screen anymore, by the way. So.
Oh shit. Okay, don't put up the Instagram thing.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it's you know, just I suppose in a bit of a conclusion is you know, at the end of the day, you know, it was probably a year or two ago. You had these sort of really funny Facebook sort of things that went around with 6 photographs. You know, of any profession. It's sort of, you know, whatever it may be. This is what my mother thinks I do. This is what my friends think I do, and this is the reality. So, you know, quite honestly, you know, there's a romantic notion about covering conflict, which it's not. It does have a massive impact on you as an individual. You know, I've been through quite a lot of trauma counseling, and it's had a massive effect on my life. So, you know, it's something that's not taken lightly. It's not romantic. It's fucking dangerous and really hard most of the time. But, you know, it's a critical part of what I feel that I need to do, and us as journalists is to be, most importantly, the voice for people who can't speak for themselves. You know, and it sounds like a bit of a cliche, and, you know, it could be debated for hours. But, you know, I also think, just sort of in conclusion, because we've got a couple of minutes, that, you know, if we don't keep going to these conflicts, whatever if they mainstream civil wars or a conflict in, you know, the Amazon rainforest about cutting down trees, you know, then we're in a really bad space as human beings. You know, we need to keep recording them for history and being the mirror for society, you know, and that's sort of the thing that still drives me. Having said that, I probably won't go and do really hard conflict again, but conflict in a more subtle way. And as I alluded to in some of my pictures, you know, conflict's ongoing, and we're fighting this unseen virus. So it's conflict photography, and, you know, those land invasions are going to continue. And so, you know, it's up to us as journalists to cover that. One thing I haven't photographed a lot of, which is critical, is is sort of conflict within the home space. So, you know, abuse within the home space. I've seen a lot of incredibly good work out there. Animal abuse, which I've touched on now and then, but not enough. So yeah, you know, my parting shot really to everyone is that, you know, it's really not as romantic as people would think, and covering hard conflict and, you know, conflicts all around us. So I even extend a challenge to all of you out there to cover conflict in your own way. You know, can be a conflict with any scenario. So, you know, give it a go.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's interesting. I think it's on Netflix. There are about 5 or 6 different documentaries on you know, conflict photography and that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah, I've seen a couple of them. Yeah,
and it's quite interesting. The one, I can't remember the names, but there were 2 different documentaries that featured the same sort of crew, but from 2 different perspectives. And in the one, yes. I'm getting goosebumps just you know, talking about it. But in the one guy died, and there was the coverage from the other side of you know. So it was quite an interesting kind of thing. And I mean, you
I understand,
definitely have the thought of you know, of romanticizing it and thinking, oh yeah, no, this, that, and the other. But I tell you what, you watch a couple of those, and it certainly, you know, makes you think twice about it, because there's a lot of things that you know, come out of it. You know, you don't really see your family that much. When you do come back, you know, there's all sorts of issues that you go through, etc. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important work, but at the same time, I think if we did sit back and go, you know, wow, maybe that's not something that I would want to do on a daily basis. And that's you know, from a you know, respect to you and your fellow photojournalists that go out there on a daily basis and find those stories and you know, show them to the world. I think it's amazing work that you do. And you know, you produce fantastic images. I mean, it's not always just the conflict stuff. I mean, I saw was it the Alex boxing gym stuff?
Yeah, for sure.
That's even conflict, I suppose, but in a sport sort of way. But I just think your images are amazing, and I'm really glad that I could get you back on again to
thanks, mate.
To see your work. It's great, and I really appreciate your time and your energy.
Yeah, thanks, and to everyone who sort of took an hour out of their life, thanks so much. And yeah, just you know, I suppose the final parting shot is just, you know, when you see those conflict pictures out in your magazines or newspaper, you know, just think about the person who made the image, but just think a bit broader about, you know, what's happening around that picture, you know. And maybe today would have just given you a bit of insights as to how I work and a lot of journalists work to get those pictures.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure. Be safe.
Lots of comments there about how awesome the presentation was, etc. So I think it went down well. Yeah, have a good weekend. Thanks for doing it on your public holiday Friday. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, be safe.
Happy days.